In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, welcome everybody to episode 5 of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. Andrew and Jerry Save the Border... of Ukraine. At least that's what we're talking about calling it. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Andrew Langer.
I'm Jerry Rogers.
And Jerry's in a bit of a snit this morning. We're getting Eeyore-ish Jerry. Listen, for those of you who've joined us in the other episodes, you know there are the many faces of Jerry Rogers, and Eeyore-ish Jerry is very entertaining to say the least. Jerry, why are you so Eeyore-ish right now?
Well, because I think that when major media, New York Times, Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, you name the venue, I think they should provide links.
Yes.
When the New York Times reports on, for instance, new protocols, recommendations, new data or new information from the CDC, they should link to the CDC page that they're reporting on. But for some reason, it's almost as if, Andrew, that the corporate media, the legacy media, they don't want us to find the primary sources.
And I think that in indications like this, I think you're absolutely correct that in situations like this, where there is a story, and we're going to get to the context of this in a moment, because there is a greater context here. That they possibly don't. I think because I know I've read New York Times articles online that have had links in them, but this one we're going to talk about in a second did not. The context, because before we start talking about Ukraine and foreign policy, and there are a couple of different things. We're going to be joined today, by the way, by Tony Schaeffer, who's the president of the London Center for Public Policy, one of my favorite organizations. Tony Schaeffer, retired lieutenant colonel from the Army. I've had him on my show. I know Jerry's had him on his show in the past. But before we talk about this, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about something that happened with episode 4, which was... I don't remember what. Oh, Andrew and Jerry Saved the Supreme Court, in which we had a good conversation with Ilya Shapiro from the Cato Institute.
And the prediction made by our guest was exactly how the Supreme Court ruled. Something that maybe we'll follow up with on a later show. The OSHA mandate, vax mandate, was struck down 6-3. No surprise, right? Yes. We predicted it. Our guest predicted it. But I raised the issue during that show that the CMS mandate for 10 million healthcare workers, that vaccine mandate actually was upheld 5-4, with both Kavanaugh and Roberts siding with the more liberal justices.
Yes,
I think that is such a dangerous precedent, such a dangerous majority. Slight majority, 5-4 ruling, that it requires us to go back and
it gets to the glancing goose theory, and it's something we're going to be talking about. And Jerry and I are going to be I'm going to say this. Jerry and I are going to be very careful with our language today. Talking about these issues.
And that, Mom, it's not because we say curse words.
Yeah, I was about to drop an F-bomb, Jerry. But the point is, our episode 4 video got removed from Facebook got removed from YouTube over our discussion of certain things having to do with the prevailing topic of public health, the issues within the pandemic. And you know, here was part of the problem, is that we don't know exactly why it got dinged. We have our theories about this, but we're going to be really careful in talking about this issue. And before we really get into the issue of Ukraine and the other issue that I know Tony's going to want to talk about, we want to talk about what happened over the weekend. In fact, Jerry, let's go ahead and open up our Ripped from the Headlines segment, because this truly is Ripped from the Headlines.
Ripped from the Headlines.
So Jerry, as we talked about this, so as our video got removed, there's a series of things that happened over the weekend. On Friday, and I want you to read. Jerry is reading the New York Times headlines. What did the New York Times headline read on Friday?
And as I look for it, let me just say this: our conversation from episode 3,
Four.
Andrew.
Which one? No,
the one that was dinged on YouTube.
Episode 4.
Episode 4. We did not discuss anything that really is outside of the central discussion on the virus, the response to the virus, policy. It wasn't something radical or out to left or right field. Very mainstream, forgive that term, a conversation about COVID protocols and COVID requirements and the rest of it. But here's from Friday, right? So Friday, on Friday, we're getting ready for pizza night. Like many of you, Friday night, you do a movie night. You're with your family, and so Friday evening, I'm checking the headlines because I want to do an update for Real Clear Health, and there it is, New York Times, and here is the headline, part of the headline from the New York Times, and that is the CDC. This quote: "The CDC conceded that cloth masks do not protect against the virus." And I read that, immediately called Andrew and said, "Oh my goodness, look at this Friday night dump." If you want to hide news, if you want to hide something, the old trick, for old hacks like Andrew and I, what you want to do is that you want to release it to the media on a Friday. And that's what happened here. And so the bottom line is this: the CDC has revised, conceded, has changed its recommendations on masks,
and they've clarified it, and more to the point. So I want to make sure we get into the timelines here. And there's an important point to having this discussion, and we're going to get to this in a second because we're going to talk about our video and anyway, and science and all of these things. So Friday, this comes out. Saturday, Glenn Youngkin is sworn in. He is inaugurated as governor of Virginia, and Governor Glenn Youngkin turns around, and among the very first actions he takes is to put a ban on mask mandates in schools, which is a hugely controversial issue. But this is what the governor did. He did this on Saturday.
Now, again, we need to clarify something here because, Jen Psaki, spokesperson for the White House, and other superintendent of schools in Virginia, the Richmond superintendent, and some others immediately responded by saying, you can't, or it's wrong to force my child not to wear a mask.
Yes.
And again, this is the fundamental misunderstanding by many on the left, and that is Youngkin's mandate or his order doesn't say you can't wear a mask.
Yes.
It says you can't force people to wear a mask. In other words, it's an opt-out.
I've pulled up Jen Psaki's tweet here.
Okay, very good.
For people to see. Hi there. I mean, it is like so much wrong with this tweet. It starts with the snarkiness. And this is, you and I have talked about how the hot take is the worst thing to ever happen in political discourse. And a corollary to this, a subset of this is the snark and being snarky. And so Jen Psaki writes, I took my glasses off. Jen Psaki writes, hi there, Arlington County parent here. Don't believe you are Glenn Youngkin, but correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you to APS Virginia, that's Arlington County Public Schools, by the way, for standing up for our kids, teachers, and administrators and their safety in the midst of a transmissible variant. Me. And Jerry's right that no one, and this is a number of people, including several of our friends, Molly Hemingway, for instance. I think Julie Gunlock may have also jumped into this as well, all pointed out to Jen Psaki that nobody is preventing her kids from wearing masks. Nobody's preventing any kids from wearing masks.
Right.
But the point is, so Friday we get X, Saturday we get Y, and then Jerry, what happened on Monday?
Well, on Monday, the CDC issued new protocols, or let me get my word correct here.
Yes.
Protocol is the wrong word. What they did was they issued new guidance.
Yes.
Guidance for COVID-19 prevention in K through 12 schools. I'm actually reading from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, its page.
Yes.
And this was updated on January the 13th. What was Monday's date?
January 13th was last week.
All right, so I'm on the wrong.
Well,
I'm on the wrong page.
This gets to your point. But the point is, right? Either way, the guidance does not comport with the New York Times reporting of what the CDC has said.
No, and worse, it actually the guidance talks about how we should move away from sports and extracurricular activities.
Oh yeah, that's just crazy.
And doesn't clarify the new information, the new data on masks. Here's the frustrating thing for me, someone who, again, and you too, Andrew Langer,
yep.
we've been involved in policy and politics for 25 years.
Yes.
We've researched, we've commented, we've participated, we've given testimony. We've worked in health policy for a very long time. And it's so frustrating for someone who just simply wants to have a conversation about where we are
now,
that it's difficult to get right information. It's difficult to, I'm going to give a little bit of the sausage making to the audience. And that is, please. Andrew and I never have a pre-call for a show. We just get on, we decide, what we're going to talk about, and we get on, we talk about it.
Sure. Well, I mean, apart from the myriad other phone calls that we have in the course of a given day, but yes, go ahead.
But the fact of the matter is we're constantly reading and going through the news and going through research and going through papers and Supreme Court decisions that, we just decide, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this, and boom, we're ready to go. Right.
Yeah.
But however, today we had a 5-minute conversation about being careful with our language because we don't want to get dinged again, because we think this information, our conversations should be up on YouTube, and YouTube and other big tech are engaged in stifling the exchange of ideas.
And this gets into the meat of where we wanted to have this conversation. We're going to have a much bigger conversation about this because we want to bring on a free speech expert at some point to talk about this. So Jerry calls me yesterday afternoon and he's like, Andrew, I've been reading up on stuff. Actually, before we get into this, here's why it's important. And again, getting into something that Jerry and I talked about in the Bottom Line segment last week in a conversation I had with my dad. We need to explain. We need to be better about explaining things. The only way we can solve problems in this world is if we have free and open exchanges of ideas. Right. And we actually have conversations. It's the only way that we can do this. Jerry and I pride ourselves on being both persuaders and persuadable. Right. If you bring an argument to us and you can persuade us, all the better. But the only way we can do that is to have an actual conversation about something. And so having a public square where these debates can happen without someone putting their thumb on the scales, is vitally important. And that's where our concern about what happened last week with our video on YouTube is concerned. And this gets into the call that Jerry gave to me yesterday. So Andrew, you could talk about this, Jerry. I mean, you were looking online and you came across a Supreme Court case called Packingham.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that I was actually looking up doing some other research on some other issues, and I came across this Supreme Court case that barred the state of North Carolina. The Supreme Court ruled that the U.S.
Supreme Court,
the United States Supreme Court decided in this case that North Carolina could not bar people from social media. Yes. In this case, it was I'm sorry for the topic, but it was sex offenders,
registered sex offenders,
right? Registered sex. So North Carolina passes a statute that bars registered sex offenders from being on social media.
Yeah,
and the Supreme Court knocked it down, saying that the social media is today's This is from 2016 to 2017. 2017. That today's public marketplace, today's public square, is social media.
Yes.
And there are constitutional free speech issues at stake here, and therefore states cannot, North Carolina cannot keep people from their constitutionally protected right to free speech.
And Jerry calls me up. He goes, Andrew, how come more people aren't talking about this? And I hadn't heard about the case. And obviously we've been having these debates, and part of the debate has been, right, we've had a long-standing debate in America about something called net neutrality, which is how internet service providers carry data. We've had the conversation about whether or not social media platforms are publishers, and whether or not they should be held liable if they do act and promote or discourage or prevent content or promote other kinds of content, whether or not they have certain liabilities under the law. We've had these things, and Jerry's like, well, how come nobody's talking about this? And part of it probably has to do with the fact that the North Carolina law had to do with registered sex offenders, but as Ilya Shapiro talks about, these big questions, these decisions, this is why the Supreme Court takes cases like Packingham, and they make decisions which say that they are the public square. And then this raises a whole nother question, right? And Jerry, as we were talking about these, goes, well, I've answered my own question because it was the state of North Carolina that was preventing certain people from accessing social media. And it wasn't the social media platforms preventing them. But then the question comes up with, okay, so the Supreme Court has defined these platforms as the public square. They say the state cannot bar entry for the public square. But nobody is then asking the question of, well, wait a minute, what happens when people are prevented from having a conversation on the public square, or talking about issues in a way that they might otherwise? And as I pointed out to Jerry,
or the public square positions fact checkers,
yes,
and says you're not welcome here. What happens to my free speech?
I want you to picture all of this, right? When this is the scenario, right? Picture this in your mind. I'm going to paint a word picture for you. Imagine legitimately a public square, a town park, a green, or whatever, and people come on and people start having conversations. And all at once, you have a self-appointed monitors who run around and put gags gags around people's mouths, to prevent them from speaking.
or bar them from being present.
Well, no, right? Remember, yes, but you remember, you can't bar them from entering, but you gag them, and if they violate the gag order, then you haul them out and you kick them out of the public square. In other words, there's an issue of symmetry, right? Abraham Lincoln, Daniel Day-Lewis and Lincoln talks about, the geometric certainty. What is it? It's I can't think of the mathematician, but the point is it's Euclidean geometry. Those things
that sounds like a word that should be banned.
Yes, Euclidean. Yes.
There you go again.
Those things that are equal to other things are equal to each other, right?
It's very pleasurable. Yes.
If A is equal to B and A is equal to C, then B is equal to C.
Yes.
And so you cannot, if in point of fact, these social media platforms are the public square, and you cannot bar people from entering the public square, the state cannot bar people from entering the public square, then it stands to reason that free exchanges of ideas cannot be barred from that same public square. Otherwise, there's no point to it. Otherwise, it is a hollow shell of what it once was. At least I think so, Jerry.
Well, and again, what's frightening is that the left the left is promoting this idea of banning all speech, all ideas,
yes,
contrary to what what they want to promote, and contrary to their ideology. It's scary. And again, this shouldn't be left or right.
Yeah.
This is something where the powerful are purposefully stifling discussion and debate.
Yes.
That's what's happening. Period.
Well, and that's just it. You know, the society cannot long endure if well, we certainly can't progress, and we can't solve problems if we're not able to talk those problems through with one another. We can't find, right. If one side is saying your speech, we are denying everything that you say, then it becomes impossible to find common ground, because it really is a policy and society on one side's terms, which is vastly un-American. And I'll dare say, right, that we talked about this a little bit, right? You remember, who was it? It was William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal who would have those debates.
Yeah.
And Gore Vidal used to call William F. Buckley a crypto-fascist, which means a hidden fascist, right? A fascist in hiding. Well, this is techno-fascism in a very real way. And that's problematic. And, you know, so if you know, and if I'm someone who was supposed to be taking, and as I call them, Antifa, or as other folks call them, Antifa, you know, one would think that if they were truly Antifa in all terms, then they would be pushing against this in the same way, by the way, that the left was railing against or railing against efforts to get rid of net neutrality, right? Years ago. You know, again, there's a certain symmetry that's involved here.
You know, and again, for our friends on the left, there's something very ironic in all of this, and that is, think about the early days of the Trump primary campaign, the Trump administration, right? He came down the elevators, and there was that very controversial speech about Mexicans and
yes,
who's coming over. It's not the best. It's this, it's that. And, you know, for many, they said, you know, Trumpism was othering immigrants. Well, what's happening today when it comes to COVID, when it comes to climate change, my goodness, even when it comes to issues like critical race theory, what the left is doing is othering. You're not valued enough to even have a say. You're not. The thing is, the left doesn't even view its political opponents as worthy adversaries. It's dehumanizing.
They are stupid. They are racist, and we've seen that come to a head with President Biden's speech last week. You know, about the election reform, right? And what that means, and anybody who opposes election reform. You had the guy who was on the news, I don't know if it was yesterday or Sunday, likening it was yesterday, likening Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to the kinds of white liberal racists that MLK warned about. This is very much the issue here. And by the way, yes, we know, I've been getting pinged on this. We know that Joe Biden's statements regarding MLK and George Floyd were from the campaign trail. Did you hear about this?
Well, yeah, a year ago, he said that Floyd's death had a greater impact worldwide, globally, than King's death.
I'm going to pull something up here, Jerry. Hold on for one second. Jared Boyden, Floyd, MLK. I want to see if I can find it on.
And again, while you do that, I want to reiterate what you said, and that is on the very most important ideas right now in the public debate. Whether many of them are science-based, like COVID, like climate change, the left is saying one side isn't even fit to enter the public square. And this is not just fringe, right? You have Chuck Todd, who is the host of a major Sunday talk show. He has said point blank, he won't have those who deny, again, his term, deny climate change on his program. And again, so this is mainstream media, not just the wonky, weird, radical left. It's mainstream liberalism is denying the public square to anyone they deem unworthy.
It is the concept of deplatforming. It is the concept of cancel culture that they say does not exist. Jerry, I'm sharing this now. This is Biden, Joe Byron, as they say in the Bing Bong videos. But I want to point something out, and I'm going to ask you a question in a moment. But here's what Joe Biden had to say a year ago.
But even Dr. King's assassination did not have the worldwide impact that George Floyd's death did.
I mean, as crazy as that statement is, Jerry, I want to call everybody's attention to this right here. Are you seeing what I'm circling here? Which is the face mask hanging off of Joe Biden's ear.
But even Dr. King's assassination.
How did this man become president of the United States? I don't understand this. It looks like he's wearing
did not have the worldwide
a Snoopy
impact.
ear on his head, and nobody is pointing this out. I'm sorry. I found.
Well, Andrew, that was kind of a cool look back in the day, back a year ago.
I'm sorry. Wait, wearing a face mask off your ear was a cool look?
Early COVID fashion was you showed your virtue by having your mask on your ear. Or remember this: some people, you know how you put the attachment on your glasses, and so there were some people who had that on their mask.
Sure.
So when they took their mask off, it just hung right here, so you can put it back on again. So the early days of COVID fashion. That was the president's virtue signal.
Yes. What? All right. So it wasn't just that Joe Biden had forgotten that his mask was on his ear.
Again, the thing is that on these very important topics, the bottom line is this. The bottom line is that you have progressives, liberals, Democrats, the mainstream media, academia, corporate culture, teacher unions, big labor, and all the rest. They have dehumanized and objectified their opponents, and they won't even view them as worthy adversaries, but rather their speech, their thought. They can't even participate in what the left considers polite conversation. This is dangerous, whether it's COVID or climate change or race theory. This is dangerous. The president of the United States, I don't see how we can not talk about this almost every day. He went to Atlanta and said that anyone who disagreed with him on the voting rights legislation in Georgia, in Texas, and several other states, that if you disagreed with him on the filibuster, on getting rid of the filibuster, changing rules, that you were essentially you were George Wallace, you were a racist, you were Jefferson
Bull
Davis,
Connor,
Bull Connor. Now, again, I wish someone would have a conversation with the left about how Wallace and Connor and Jefferson Davis, for that matter, were Democrats.
Yes,
I mean, you and I. This is, again, a future show, but I want to say this right now. If you look at where Democrats have had absolute power, right? You see it in Baltimore City and what's happening there. You see it in cities like New York and San Francisco and Chicago, where Democrats have absolute power. You see the degradation, the degradation, the crime, the economic plight, etc. But think about this too. Think about Jim Crow.
Yeah,
Jim Crow existed in those places where Democrats had absolute power.
Absolutely. Well, yes. And we can get into sort of party history.
But it shows you the danger. It shows you the danger of not allowing in a competition of ideas.
Of course.
True diversity.
And that's an excellent point.
Right.
Yeah.
True diversity isn't based upon your race or ethnicity. It's based upon your ideas and your mind.
Sure.
And this is the problem. The left doesn't want diversity. The left wants power, and they want absolute power. And from history, we know what happens.
They want power, and they want power at the sake of ignoring other things that are happening, ignoring the realities of things that are happening.
Facts, science, yes.
But I want to shift gears here, Jerry, because we're in just a couple minutes. We're going to be bringing on our guest, Tony Schaeffer from the London Center. Jerry, this is a tweet that came out 12 minutes ago. I have no idea who World on Alert is, but this is a TikTok from somebody called Nutka Safanova. I know I'm mispronouncing that, but these are allegedly, and it says it's something about the train is this is coming from Moscow, but this is a train of tanks heading Russian tanks heading to the Ukrainian border.
Why don't you do this? Why don't you set up before Tony comes on? Can you set up quickly? Why is Russia amassing troops and equipment on the Ukraine
Well,
border?
you know something. You know what? I'll pull this up. It's helpful to pull up a map. We'll pull this up when Tony's on as well, because you're real quick. For those of you who don't know, I have a degree in Soviet studies. I at one time could speak fairly passable Russian.
Because you're a spy.
But so a lot of folks don't remember. Well, all of this area in Central Europe, these are, there were principalities and small kingdoms and other sort of government subdivisions that all eventually coalesced around a state that was known as Ukraine. And then after the Soviet Union became the Soviet Union, Ukraine was a federated Soviet Socialist Republic. So it was part of the USSR. And in fact, the so-called what are called the White Russians, they were largely around this area called Belarus, which means White Russian. But because all of these areas changed hands, this area down here that you see Romania down here, and what is Western Ukraine and what is Moldova here, this was Moldavia and sometimes a part of Poland, which is up here. So some of it was Hungary, which later became the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So all of these areas have changed hands. Now, Russia was an empire. And as such, you had the Tsar, and the Tsar exercised great dominion over huge swatches of land in Eastern and Central Europe. And then, and so once the Soviet Union became the Soviet Union and Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, it seemed like just another aspect of Russian imperialism, even if the Marxist-Leninists called themselves anti-imperialist. But so after the fall of communism,
it's like Antifa calling themselves anti-fascist.
Yes, that's right. After the fall of communism, and after the Soviet Union dissolved, Ukraine once again became an independent state. And as such, interestingly enough, because the Soviets had, and we'll get into this with Tony, because the Soviets had nuclear weapons stationed in Ukraine, in order to convince the Ukrainian government to give up their nuclear weapons and send them back to Russia, they signed a treaty with a number of nations, including the United States, which in some measures might obligate these nations to defend Ukraine in case they are attacked. And so back while Barack Obama was president, I'm going to sum this up. You will remember that during the 2012 presidential campaign, Mitt Romney talked about Russia being the greatest threat to the United States, and Barack Obama turned and quipped to him.
The 80s called Mitt, and they want their foreign policy.
And they want their foreign policy back. At the same time, we know that Obama made concessions to Vladimir Putin and said, I will have more flexibility in dealing with you after the election. And then in 2014, Russia invaded, and I am going to reshare this.
Crimea.
Russia invaded Crimea and actually also invaded eastern portions of Ukraine, but really wholly took over Crimea. Which is, as you can see, is a peninsula or an island that stretches into the Black Sea. And it's vitally important in terms of Russia being able to gain access to from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So
Crimea has a strategic importance, but also roughly 18% of Ukraine is ethnic Russian. Correct?
Yes. And so
now, is that population ethnic Russian? Is that mostly in Crimea?
No. That population is mostly in eastern Ukraine. Okay. Some of it is in Crimea. Keeping in mind that Crimea is also a massive tourist destination, so huge amounts of money are made in Crimea. So it's an economic powerhouse that Russia would love to have.
Right now, today, who controls Crimea.
Russia controls Crimea. And incidentally, this is part of the reason why you will not see. We got to take a break and get Tony. This is part of the reason why you will not see NATO engage in this, because so long as Ukraine's historic borders are not within the control of Ukraine, NATO will not allow them to join. But tell you what, Jerry, I think it's time to get our expert advice from Tony Schaeffer. So let's cue that up.
Expert advice.
Welcome to our expert advice segment. Joining us now is Tony Schaeffer. He's the president of the London Center for Public Policy, retired lieutenant colonel in the Army as well, and the author of a number of different books, Operation Dark Heart. In fact, Tony, I'm pulling up your Amazon page here right now. Operation Dark Heart, The Last Line, among other books. So glad you could join us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate being on. I always enjoy, Andrew, our conversations because I always know it's going to be fact-based and very rich and controversial details when you get to it. So I always enjoy it. So thanks.
Well, unfortunately, Tony, these days fact-based conversations can get you banned from social media.
That's what I mean. Fact-based conversations are fundamentally controversial. So there you go.
Tony, let's start here because we've decided that we want to start off our conversations, go from the simple to the more complex.
Sure.
Explain the situation in Ukraine to us like we are 5-year-old children.
So I would go in and basically lay it out that you have a man in the form of Vladimir Putin, who is a thug, and as many thugs are apt to do, they act as criminals. In the case of Vladimir Putin, he has stated that his goal is to reestablish the good old days of the Soviet Union. And I would explain to the kids that the Soviet Union was the Russian communist empire that after I think it was 1917 on, basically dominated the Russian Republic and then expanded out after World War II to cover Eastern Europe, and they called it the Warsaw Pact.
Yeah.
And essentially after the end of the Soviet Union, which came, I think, was 20 years ago, this last Christmas, 30 years ago, yeah. Man, I'm dating myself. 30 years ago, when the Soviet Empire, when the Soviet Union fell 30 years ago, a number of former Soviets, people like Vladimir Putin, who was a KGB guy, decided that it was going to be his goal, and he's never hidden it, that to reestablish the prestige, influence, and capacity of the old Soviet Union. That's what this is all about. And obviously, to reestablish the old Soviet prestige, they got to get Ukraine back in the fold. And they got Sevastopol. They've been engaged in low-level guerrilla operations within the region for the past couple of years. And Putin has made it very clear that his desire is to put Ukraine back into, if not influence, I think he wants actual control of Ukraine, which is a very prosperous country with a lot of resources, a lot of agrarian production, as well as a very modern 21st century nation. So there you go.
Tony, I've pulled up a map, and there's a pretty good map here, and sort of showing this. You have Crimea down here. Jerry had asked me just before we brought you on, right? This issue of Crimea is totally in control by the Russians.
Right.
Then you have Eastern Ukraine, which is, some of it is now in Russian control. Some of it has got this Russian separatist or the pro-Russian separatist movement. Let's talk about this. Let's dial it back to 2014. Because one of the things that Jerry and I had talked about was the issue of what Obama said during the 2012 campaign, but Jerry and I didn't get into frankly the impotence of the Obama administration in 2014 in their response to what Putin was doing. Talk about that.
So the Obama And what I find is ironic is that some of the recent folks, Jake Sullivan even commented on the quote unquote Obama mistakes regarding the current aggression. It's like, oh, we won't make the same mistakes. Like, no, they're doing the same exact thing. And basically, Obama made it very clear that first off, he considered this a regional issue, that Putin he considered a regional leader. And I think, to be honest with you, Andrew, just little barbs like that is like throwing a red flag in front of a bull.
Sure.
And so he encouraged Putin to move forward and do this, and Putin called his bluff. It's like, okay, I'm going to go in, I'm going to take some terrain, and what are you going to do about it? And of course, in typical Obama fashion, he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And I think if nothing else, Putin is a masterful poker player. He knows exactly when to call people's bluffs. And I'm not saying this to be a partisan, although full disclosure, I did advise the Trump campaign as their national security advisor. Putin would have not called Trump's bluff because Trump wouldn't have bluffed. He would have done something regarding this. And that's why you saw that there was none of the shenanigans going on during the Trump years, because Trump was providing lethal capacity. And the other thing is that I find this ironic. My friend and colleague and one of our senior fellows, Jim Woolsey, was actually involved in the 1990s negotiations where Ukraine was asked to give up its nuclear weapons with some guarantee.
We talked about that earlier. Yep.
Yeah. So it was with a guarantee that if the Ukraine, give up your nuclear weapons, we, the West, will come to your aid should your territorial integrity ever be compromised. Well, by the way, it was under Clinton. A Democrat regime. So the only people who've ever taken this seriously, apparently, is Trump, a Republican, who actually felt it was in our interest to support the Ukrainians. And so we're left with a very difficult choice of what to do at this point, because back to the Obama point, Obama wasn't going to do anything. He didn't do anything. And in the case of many would argue that the Biden administration is simply the third Obama administration, which in many ways it really is, because the same people are showing up. Valerie Jarrett's over in the White House every day, calling audibles. I don't know how you can make it any more obvious than that, but it is what it is. So.
Let me just say this for our audience, and Tony, you might want to comment, and that is, the great irony here is that in early on in the Trump administration, you had many, even those in the media who should know better, who blamed Donald Trump for the Russians being in Crimea.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, look, this thing happens in the micro all the time. It's like they were all blaming the new governor of Virginia for all the different failures in '95. It's like he wasn't governor yet; it was still north of. So no, I think people, especially political folks who don't care to actually study the facts, and this goes back to our original point about the truth being controversial. All these failures have to be laid at the feet of the Obama administration. The failure in to take advantage of the Green Revolution in Iran, 2008, 2009, Obama. The failure to check Putin, Obama. The failure to do anything regarding the red line in Syria and in the region, Obama. And Trump, God bless him, was doing everything he could within the confines of his authorities to actually fix some of this and get us out of some of this. And again, full disclosure, I did work with Mike Pompeo when Mike was over at CIA. I would meet with Mike about every 6 months as one of his advisors.
Now he's known as Half Mike now.
He's gone back to his fighting weight at the U.S. Military Academy. So, yes.
Yeah, I knew him years ago when I was working for the Kauffman Foundation, and he was one of the members of Congress that were working on what we call the startup bill. It was a mechanism to deregulate so entrepreneurs and startup firms would have a better chance at succeeding. But he's a good man.
Oh, he is. Yeah. Can I tell you a quick story? My first meeting with him, very quick.
Absolutely.
So he called me in right after he got confirmed, and he wanted to talk about a number of issues. And at the time, London Center was pushing this idea, which became prominent, this condominium of Middle East countries working together. We called it the Middle East NATO. It turned into this other, the Abraham Accord. So, we were early on, and so we had a conversation. So as I sat down on the 7th floor in Mike's office, I looked around the office there at CIA, and I said, Mike, I am very gratified to see that one of the first things you did is remove all of John Brennan's prayer rugs. It's really a good move. And he gave me that look like, Tony, don't say things like that.
Oh, that's it. We're
Like,
gonna get banned from YouTube again, Andrew. Here we go.
That's all right.
Let me, Andrew. I mean, this is your area of expertise.
No, Jerry.
But to the point of, and make the complex conversational. There's a lot going on. There's COVID. There are debates about mandates, and there are inflation issues and supply chain, energy costs. I mean, things are, you couldn't imagine. We couldn't have set up a worse scenario. So my question is a very simple one. Why should the American people, why should they mind or care about Russian troops on the Ukraine border?
That's a question. I get that a lot. And it's one of those things where I actually watched The Darkest Hour last night as a movie.
Oh, good movie.
Winston Churchill. Yeah, it's a great movie. Award-winning. I was a little bit skeptical at first, but it was very well done. And one of the themes in that is like Chamberlain had gotten the British into the situation they were in. Basically, he kept giving things up to Hitler, giving it up. And so the forces that be wanted to negotiate a peace with, Gary Oldman. I like Gary as an actor. I could not believe what a great job he did as Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend it. But this is the central point of your question, Jerry, is, how far do you let these guys go before you rein them in? So at this point, no, Ukraine is not a member of NATO. There's not an Article 5 requirement to respond, but our Polish allies and NATO members are a border nation, and they are concerned, as well as the other Baltic states are very concerned. One of the things I've said is that we ought to, Norway and Finland both have applied to NATO. We should let them in.
Yes.
So make that statement. And then I would follow it up with very strong military action, telling myself again, when I was a very young lieutenant, I deployed to Germany to do counterterrorism stuff in 1985 as part of something called Reforger, Return of Forces to Germany. Every 4 or 5 years, I forget the time frame, we would do a complete a large-scale exercise to show that we could return to Europe in force. So the only thing Putin's going to understand is pushback. So if not Ukraine, then when is the question I ask people.
And the polls have warned us that we're looking at war in 15 years.
Right. So my belief is the Ukrainians have the right to defend themselves. We actually gave them an agreement that we would help them defend themselves, a Democrat regime, the Clintons. So why is that our word not good enough to come to their defense now? And again, I just don't think Putin would have the cojones. He's a bully, but I don't think he would have the cojones to go head on, full on into a war. But he will continue to nibble away at the edges, which is what he's doing.
So Tony, I've just put up on my screen, on our screen, for the viewers, a piece that I wrote in May of 2014 called "The Case for Ground Forces in Ukraine," which sort of makes the argument, again, talking about the treaty obligations and offering up an interpretation of the treaty, and also suggesting that it's very similar in some respects to what we do in terms of our status of forces in South Korea, that it acts as a hedge. I came in for some serious criticism from a guy named John Schindler, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who thinks that he's the greatest expert in Russia, even though he was caught in a Russian honey trap a couple of years later. Him and his buddy Tom Nichols talk about this. I mean, I am wary, obviously, because you never want to commit troops in an area unless you're willing to, put them in harm's way. But talk about this, where
Andrew, that's the Princess Bride strategy of
never get involved in land war in Asia.
Tom Nichols is, I think, is Marx reincarnated. Just look at his pictures. Just look at it. I mean, you can see it's like he's going for that look. Just say. I've said this to him on Twitter, by the way. I'm not saying I haven't said to him, to his virtual face. Anyway, point being, to these guys have a fundamental belief that somehow their being sympathetic with them gives them some insight. I would argue the contrary. They are almost as if they have. Yeah, there you go. I'm blocked too. Yeah. Well, I'm off Twitter. I got kicked off for calling out all the stuff I was. So I'm gone. I'm over Getter now. So yeah,
it's only a matter of time for me.
I went out with the blaze of glory. It was great.
Good for you.
Yeah. So anyway, my point being is these guys are nitwits when it comes to actually understanding what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So they've consistently apologized for him. And Tom Nichols, I said this on Twitter. He was doing Vladimir Putin's work for him by supporting the Russian collusion narrative. These guys are apologists and promoters of Russia and their aggression, not predictors. They're part of it. So I would say that the only way you're going to be able to rectify this is actually get back in sync with our values and the values of those which are NATO. NATO was fundamentally set up to stop aggression. So your point about South Korea is exactly on the mark.
Thank you.
We should be setting it up for purposes of trying to make sure that if there's aggression going back, I mean, come on, we learned this during the buildup to World War II. And oh, by the way, Russians, when Germany invaded Poland, who was on the other side of taking the other side of Poland? The Russians, the Soviets. They split up Poland.
Oh,
come on.
That's right.
So
I mean, Ribbentrop Pact.
Yeah.
Hey, but before we let you go, I'm sorry, Jerry. I know you got to.
And again, because I might, I'll go back and listen to this again later and just take some notes. But just two things, Tony, and you can be brief. The first is you mentioned get back to our values. Let me comment on that in this sense. Unfortunately, we have the Democrats and liberals, progressive in this country, that demean American values. Number one, so we're at a point in our history where we're questioning as a nation, as who we are and what our values are. And but however, tied in with that is how the Biden administration left Afghanistan, and how does that lesson play out with Putin? Because here's what I know. My father's a Vietnam era veteran, and I grew up, and my dad always said the Russians would never come here, Jerry. There's too many of us. We're too armed. The American people wouldn't stand for it, and he had that kind of aggressiveness. But he also said, my father said, and again, my father, 8th grade education, went in. He was airborne. He said that he talked about how I lost my train of thought for here, but he talked about how. American values is our greatest protector. And he also talked about this. I'm sorry. He said this. He said everyone looked at Vietnam as a tragic mistake, and my father believed that Vietnam, the fact that we stuck to it to the mid 70s, actually was a warning against the Russians. Yes. That we would commit to something and stick to it for 1954 to 1974, whatever it was. So in that context, American values and the debacle in Afghanistan, what does that do in terms of this geopolitical situation with Putin?
So let me answer the question in two parts. Part of it is, I think, what we have up here, Andrew put on the screen already, is the fact that so many of our failures are not based on lack of intelligence or lack of capacity. It's lack of political will, or the politicians allowing the military to do what's necessary. So I would argue in Vietnam, there was a path to victory, the village support operations, where we were actually enabling villages to support themselves, a very similar strategy that would have worked in Afghanistan. But again, the idea was we had to commit ourselves to a central government that would be the force that would, it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to work in Vietnam. It didn't work in Afghanistan. And so the problem is people who have the solutions are shuffled away. Look, you guys, my book, Operation Dark Heart, let me pull it out here. You guys have seen it before, and I got it up on the wall. I talk about the path to victory. The path to victory was to actually to figure out a way to partner with the tribes and warlords. The Afghan, there's no central government tradition. There's no tradition of that. They are not the Afghan people are not ungoverned. They're self-governed, and that we should have accepted that That's how we won in the initial entry in Afghanistan. We worked with all the tribes and warlords. So we chose to ignore that and pretend that we could set up a central government that could sustain itself. That was our fault. So many of these victories are not from our lack of intelligence or understanding or able danger. Why, Jerry, why do you think that SOCOM took 16 years? Look at this.
Jerry, I don't know if you can see this. But
I see. Yeah. Yep.
16. Why do you think SOCOM? I testified in 2006. And right before I testified, Judicial Watch took my information and put it into a FOIA. So what I testified in 2006 under oath, both open and closed, why is SOCOM only now saying 16 years later, hey, are you still interested? Because they don't want to talk about the fact that we knew about the 9/11 hijackers. We were targeting them. We had operations ready to go counter these guys, and we were told, yeah, don't worry about it. So,
folks, so you understand, this Judicial Watch got this information in just the last couple of days from SOCOM. That's why Tony and I had traded. That's why one of the reasons why Tony's on with us today. To answer your question, we know these things. It's not the military, it's not the intelligence community, it's the policymakers who fail. Tony, before I let you go, so I'm going to put you on the spot here. Is Russia going to invade Ukraine this winter?
They are. It's not going to be like the whole thing. I think you saw from the map, they're already kind of focused on the eastern part of the country. So I think you're going to see a great deal of essentially bifurcation. You'll see, you can see right there on the map. You can see where all the lines of approach are. I don't think they have the resources or the need at this point to take Kiev. You want to stay away from urban centers. I don't think you want to, but all that area, I think you're going to see the bifurcation right down the middle. And the belief is going to be Ukraine will gradually kind of fall within their entire sphere. So I think that's what you're going to see within the next 2 weeks.
There you go. Well, listen,
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. Because it's winter and the Russian army, it's much easier to move those tanks over the frozen soil of Ukraine.
Yeah, and they've been training for the winter operations for a while. So
I know Tony has to go, but just real quick, what kind of fight does the Ukraine put up?
The Ukrainians are great people, but they're not great fighters. And I think this is something I've talked to a number of folks who have spent time in Ukraine. This is both good and bad. They just don't have the viciousness that a lot of the Soviets have. Now, the other thing going for the Ukrainians, the Soviets tend to not do well outside of the Soviet Union.
Interesting.
The Great Patriotic War went very well because the Russians were defending essentially, their territory.
Absolutely.
I think it's going to be a little bit different here. So as much as I think he's going to do it, I don't think it's going to be the cakewalk that Putin thinks it's going to be. So
interesting. Well, Tony Schaeffer, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Jerry. Always great to join you guys. Have me back. I'd like to come back and talk more about. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. So.
Listen, we will absolutely have you back.
Great.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, guys.
And with that in mind, let's start our bottom line segment.
The bottom line.
So, Jerry, and you'll notice I shortened that. I took out the clip from On Golden Pond because that's another thing that we got dinged for. That was a really good discussion with Tony Schaeffer, wasn't it?
Yeah, and bottom line for me, just to start with, is that what a good guy he is. What a genuinely good man. Me. I'm most comfortable sometimes, often at the corner of an Irish pub.
Yeah.
I think I could sit for hours with him, and he said one thing that struck me, but also
besides the fact that I'm right, Jerry, that I was right in 2014. Go ahead.
He said and that is that we have these debacles, and loss of life, and it's often because of political hacks.
Absolutely.
And again, going back to 9/11 and what we knew and how we didn't defend ourselves because of political correctness, because of again, it wasn't called that then, but because of wokeism, because we were questioning our own values. And that's another thing that he said that struck me, and that is, how do we defend against a Putin? And that is, well, we get back to our values. But I'll ask you this, Andrew, and I'll zip it for a second before I lose my train of thought again. But the bottom line is that it seems to me that the left, I'm sorry to say it, but I'm going to say it, hates America, hates American values. You hear this all the time. And so how are we supposed to defend our borders and defend against tyrants like a Putin when half the country, or when the establishment in this country, the elites, the media and the corporations and the academia and the Democratic Party, they question and they reject American values?
Well, that's exactly it. And this gets into the evidence for what you're talking about, because we believe in evidence. Because you just said, and I would say we can have a question as to whether or not Democrats hate America or progressives hate America, but they certainly hate American values. We opened up the conversation today talking about free speech and freedom of expression and the free exchange of ideas. And that is a fundamental. There is a reason why the First Amendment is the First Amendment. In fact, if you go back to that Packingham case that we were talking about, and I'll pull this up, Jerry. There's a this piece. Let me pull this up here that I've been reading. I'm going to go to the beginning of it.
While you're pulling that up, think about this, right? How can Putin do what he does? And that is because there is this understanding and love of Mother Russia. The Russians are fierce to defend their territory because there's such a thing as Russia and Russians. In America, we're not bound by ethnicity or blood, but we're bound by our values. And so when you have the political class and the economic class in this country hating American values, essentially the nation ceases to exist if we don't respect the First Amendment and we don't respect the Bill of Rights and American values.
And so this piece that I started reading because of what you were talking, the Washington Journal of Law, Technology, and Arts, censorship, free speech, and Facebook, applying the First Amendment to social. Matthew Hooker had written this. It's a really great article about it. But one of the things he talks about is, how the Supreme Court has discussed the First Amendment as literally a first principle among others that are all important, but they say the First Amendment is more important than others. That's why it's so. When you're balancing, for instance, First Amendment versus property rights, the First Amendment balances out, or the First Amendment on balance, it law weighs down more heavily. But again, right, we sort of look at all of these things, all of these principles, and you see how the progressive left has torn at these principles, right? We have to throw out the principles of the American founding because they were enacted by white, racist, slaveholding old men, essentially. And so we need to change the First Amendment. We need to get rid of the Second Amendment. We need to sharply curtail the Fourth Amendment. We need to change, the property rights aspects of the Fifth Amendment. We don't believe in the Ninth or the 10th Amendments, right? All of those things sort of tied together are emblematic of this. And so that's why, it was not where I thought we were going to go. Obviously we focused on Ukraine in our discussion with Tony. But this gets to it. It's funny because I don't talk about this much. I talked about it more on the air, but you may not remember this, Jerry, but back in the early 2000s, after 2003, when we reinvaded Iraq, I was asked to chair a working group on property rights in the international context. In trying to find ways to inculcate an American approach to private property rights into our rebuilding in both, to a lesser extent, Afghanistan, to a greater extent, Iraq. And those ideas were categorically rejected. I'm not going to go into detail as to why it was so important. But it gets into these values that you're talking about. And overall, with regards to Ukraine, I am reminded of the phrase, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And this is, I think this is going to be especially telling when we talk about what's happening in Ukraine, on the ground in Ukraine.
No, I agree. And the bottom line is this, is that, we have to secure our border.
Yeah.
We have to deal with inflation, supply chain, the myriad issues in America that we're facing. The sadness there is that much of what ails us is self-inflicted.
Yes,
this administration truly is inept. This president is unable to process information. I'm reminded, we were talking to Tony about this. On ABC News, the president, back a while, was asked the question, what did the generals tell you about the pullout in Afghanistan?
Yes.
They told you that we had to do certain things. And the president denied it. He said, I never heard any of this from the generals, which calls into question. He's either a liar, or he can't process information, right? And here we are with Ukraine. What's going to happen if Putin invades and the Chinese are on the march, and in Iran we're going to re-enter into a deal with Iran? This administration its foreign policy records in just a year is as bad as its domestic record. Our enemies are on the march.
And this gets into, as Tony says, when you have folks like Valerie Jarrett calling audibles at the White House, this is hugely, hugely problematic. It's interesting, right? Because one of the things that we didn't have time to get to, and unfortunately with Tony, we could have kept him for an hour or more probably, but Tony had a thing that he had a hard deadline to get out by. One of the things I wanted to ask him about was this. Let's not forget that the Biden family was deeply enmeshed in Ukrainian issues as this was all going on. The Ukrainian government hired Hunter Biden in no small measure in 2014, 2015 to get U.S. attention focused on what was happening in Ukraine. This is a family that should have an intimate knowledge, an intimate understanding of what's going on there, and yet they seem to be completely naive. And then when you take it into together with what Putin, I'm sorry, with what Biden said on the campaign trail, with what the Democrat accusations against Team Trump versus the reality of what Team Trump was doing vis-a-vis Russia, and then Biden coming in and one of his early acts being getting rid of the sanctions on the oil pipeline, the Nord oil pipeline. I mean, it paints a damning picture. Before we move on, Jerry, I do want to say I was personally gratified in our conversation with Tony that he appreciated my piece, my thesis of my piece in 2014 in the National Review, which I clearly need to repost and revisit. Go ahead.
Well, look, the bottom line is this too. The Russian military. Russia is a nation of 146 million people. It's a large country. It has the 5th largest standing army in the world, and it has somewhere up to 20 million in reserve.
Yeah.
This is a very serious military power.
Yeah.
And again, if past is prologue, if you let a tyrant, if you let a military power just roll over its weaker enemies, eventually you're going to have to fight that power on your own shores. But let me say this.
Yeah, please.
There was a time when in America, I would have said to Tony when he said that the Russians are fierce fighters, especially when they're defending their homeland. We have, again, I say the word half, it's a euphemism, but half of America refuses to defend America.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, even with our technology, even with our military power, I'm not sure if America could defend itself today.
Well, listen, and listen, we've had this conversation with Tony before. Both of us have at various points in time about the compromises that are being done to our Department of Defense. Our men and women who are in uniform.
Look, I mean, it's not even that. It's not. You're right.
Yes,
but we're teaching young people in America's public schools that America is a racist.
Yes,
that it is a homophobic. It is a economic depraved nation. Yeah. So when you're teaching, again, C.S. Lewis, when you mock valor, and then you are surprised to have traitors in your midst. This is what we're doing. We're training young people to hate their country. And there's going to come a time when, this is why, in my mind, loyalty is the greatest of all attributes, because, there's that scene in the movie The Town. Have you seen this?
Yeah, sure. I haven't seen The Town.
Well, Ben Affleck's character goes into his buddy and says, look, I need a favor. You can't ask me what it is. You can never ask me about it. We're going to hurt some people. And there's a pause. And his friend says, whose car are we going to take? That kind of attitude of we're going to protect our own. I wonder if that exists in this country any longer.
Yeah. No, and listen, it gets
on that sad note, Andrew.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate that, Jerry. I mean, it gets down to this issue of, I set up. I had this thought this morning about just where we are going to be as a nation. What is America going to look like in, I'm going to say 20, 25 years. And I talk about this. I talked about this on the air. I talked about this with regards to Baltimore and sort of setting out where we would want, where the mayor of Baltimore would want Baltimore to look in 20, 25 years. And, this is not me sort of creating and spinning dystopian fantasies. I'm literally, legitimately wondering about this as folks who have been taught to show disdain for these American institutions, as they're being taught to embrace policies that bear no correspondence to reality, right? What does an America look like in which everybody drives an electric car, but we don't generate enough electricity for all those electric cars,
right?
Or where the power grid gets shut down, or where the supply chain is. And you think about this, Jerry, and you think about how futurists looked at America back in the 1970s, and the things where they went wrong, and the areas where they went right. And sort of this gets back to where I wanted to go. I like you. I lost my train of thought there for a second. Khrushchev said in 1960, whatever it was, maybe it was late 50s. He said it was widely reported as "we will bury you."
Right.
What he was really saying is "we will be at your funeral," and that Khrushchev at the time was laying the seeds for undermining America's values even then, and certainly it accelerated in the 1960s. And I appreciate what you had to say about Vietnam, because that's an important part of all of this. But, certainly we've seen that the Russians are still active in doing what they can to turn us against one another.
And they're winning.
And they're winning. I mean, they're succeeding. I'm not even going to say winning and losing. They are succeeding at this.
Right.
Because I don't want to couch it in winning and losing terms.
Except for the fact that we went through 4 years of the Russia hoax.
Yes.
We had members of Congress that were that promoted it. We had our Department of Justice, our FBI. We had the Obama administration spying and leaking and acting in ways that you would never imagine.
I don't deny any of this
happening in America.
I think absolutely 100% the Russians are succieding. I don't know why I had that visceral reaction to saying that.
Well, let me just again I like the bottom line things, right?
I know you do. That's why we call it the bottom line segment, Jerry.
But the Russians have a sense of themselves. Look, there's Russia has problems and issues, and
I don't know.
But the Russian people know who they are. The Chinese, they know who they are. The Iranians, even, they know who they are. Our enemies have a sense of themselves at a time when in America we're questioning ourselves.
I don't know, Jerry. I think that when you're talking about essentially a series of totalitarian regimes, I think the folks in power have a sense of who they are and the power that they want to grab. I don't think the average Russian gives two wits about Ukraine. And if you ask them, they would probably say, if they were allowed to speak honestly, that they could care less about whether or not Russia retook eastern Ukraine. I think,
a question for Tony, I'll ask you, because you have a big head for knowing things. All right. So Russia goes in and they draws that line in eastern Ukraine, Crimea, is under Russian influence, under Ukraine, under Russian influence. To what end? What does Putin get from this? Access to the Black Sea. Okay, fine.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things, right? So, and again, I pulled the map back up. So, obviously, there is access to the Black Sea, tourism dollars on Crimea. There are, I believe, there are oil resources down on the Black Sea here. But what else he gets in, there's the agricultural issues here, but it is also for him. It is there is a certain degree of personal. Are you there? Did I lose you? There you go.
I'm here.
There is a degree of personal and what he would say a national pride that is at work here, which is returning Russia to its former glory. Tony talked about the restoration of the Soviet Union. There's part of that. There is the idea of being an empire, again, a Russian empire, without Putin being an emperor. And I guess this gets into, right? It's funny because I rewatched Woody Allen's Love and Death over the weekend, which is one of my favorite Woody Allen movies, which is about sort of Russia in the age of the Napoleonic invasions. Yeah, there was a certain degree of national pride that is at work, and certainly the national pride goes into it for the Russians if their motherland is invaded, the Rodina. But it's less of an issue in terms of pushing imperialism out. This is more about Putin and his perception of himself and his perception of Russia's power.
How old is Putin? And who's next in line?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Yeah.
I will say this much, right? Because again, as we talk about the eclipsing American sphere of influence abroad, Putin really sees himself in a race against the Chinese, and it's and China-Russian relations have always been very tense for a lot of reasons. Not during the time of the Soviet Union, it was competing visions of Marxism, competing flavors of Marxism.
It's interesting you say that because, by the way, Putin is 69.
There you go, dude.
It'd be interesting, an American president looking at the geopolitical issues sees the rise of China and the threat of China.
Yeah.
I mean, why not again do what Nixon did, right? Why doesn't America align itself with Russia in terms of strategic defense against the Chinese?
Yeah, I mean, listen. Well, I mean, because I think honestly there are two different. I was going to say modus operandi. There are two different goals that are at work. I mean, both want to be a dominant world power and are competing to be that dominant world power. China's sphere of influence or zone of interest, sphere of interest is much larger than Russia. I mean, Russia already
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
You make a strategic decision that the Russians are essentially less of a global threat than the Chinese. So what you do is you make your enemy, who's also the enemy of your enemy, you make him at least your strategic partner.
I don't know.
And then maybe you have more influence over stopping them from invading Ukraine.
Yeah, but I think both of them respond in different ways, right? Russia only knows strength and will only respond to someone who stands up strongly. China, it's very different. I mean, China, obviously, you have to be much more savvy when it comes to sort of dealing with that threat and understanding what they're doing to counter them. I don't think it would matter. Hold on. My point is, I don't think it would matter to China if we had a stronger alliance with Russia. Now, on the other hand, right, if and I love this idea from Tony. We should be making sure that every European country that is not a member of NATO is a member of NATO. Or I say this obviously not Ukraine.
So long as NATO pulls the trigger if one nation is attacked. Well, here again. I'll say it again. The bottom line, all of this is almost a moot if America doesn't regain a sense of itself.
And that's it, and that's exactly it, Jerry. And part of this is, we have these competing visions of how we compete on the world stage. And I know the sun's changing over here as well. No one is saying that we should retreat from the world stage. There are people. I'm not saying, neither Jerry nor I are saying we need to retreat from the world stage. We just have to be much, much more conscientious about how we do it. We have to have a goal in mind. And so I would say that if we're going up against China, what it means is we need to have an activist trade and aid policy that's goal is to act as a check against Chinese economic aggression in places like that.
Instead, we're giving the Chinese a 3-decade pass on the restrictions of climate change agreements and all the rest of it. We have an administration right now. We have a media right now. We have an academia right now, and even a corporate culture right now that are at odds with what's best for America. And again, it goes back to this religiosity, climate change, COVID policies, critical race theory. This is religion for the left, and they're fanatical about it.
All right, Jerry, before I let you go, did you get a chance to watch The Eternals yet?
No, and you know what?
Don't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know. I was talking to a buddy of mine. He's like, yeah, Jerry, one of the Eternals decides that the American bombing of nuclear.
Yes.
I mean, give me that's the end of. Again,
it's not worth it. It's like there's really no point. There's no point to it. That's my review. There's no point to the Eternals.
Yeah.
And then the movie goes on. Eternal. Go and I don't even think you need. Here's my fundamental problem. So they bring on Kit Harington, and I know you didn't watch all the seasons of Game of Thrones.
No, yeah.
But the guy who plays Jon Snow, Kit Harington, he's on for the first 10 minutes, and then he's in for the last 10 minutes. Maybe less, and he's the most interesting person in the entire.
But the body, for our audience, because we're teasing that the Eternals actually, it's at the heart of the movie. It's an un-American. It's an American.
Oh yeah,
bashing
but it's
movie.
not. Yeah, it's American bashing, but it's not even. That's not the reason why it's awful. I mean, that's part and parcel of it being awful. Is the politics that it plays with it. It's just a dumb movie. And dumb in a bad way. All right, Jerry. Listen, I think that's got to wrap it up.
That's it, baby.
For this week. Are you doing any radio?
Well, I do. My show on Sunday, of course, and then some other things in the hopper, and I'll let the folks know as they come.
Got it. Well, listen, as Jerry, you always say,
find the truth, plant your feet, stand firm.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun, and please stay safe.